What's going on, everyone? So today we get to dive into the lifespan of Star Wars Unlimited and kind of address some of the comments. Is Star Wars Unlimited dying? This is something that people are really starting to come out with for a few different reasons that I'm going to review here today, but also because in the horizon, we are expecting a rotation that there are a lot of people vocally against. Maybe a loud minority. However, I'm not going to make that judgment since I don't know and don't have accurate results. But rather, I'm going to talk about some of the criticisms, talk about what I think about the game, and overall just kind of some pieces of data that I know as someone who has been covering the game for actually close to 2 years now. I mean, the game was released March of 2024. We're about to enter into 2026. We're only about, 4 months away from a 2-year anniversary. So the game is pretty crazy. And part of the reason I decided to make the video in general was, some of you over on my Patreon who are supporting me through each of these videos, you've been hearing a lot from your a group of players, and we got to talk about it. So the first things first, and that is rotation. This is the biggest complaint. This is the biggest thing that people are all across the board, saying if you're against rotation, that is going to kill the game. It's going to completely destroy the player base and completely set up for a really huge downturn of players once Set 7 comes out. And I think this is a very interesting take. Not that it's wrong or anything like that in terms of, your opinion of your enjoyment of the game. Perhaps for you, having the first 3 sets rotate out is going to be such a massive loss in terms of whether it's the cards that you enjoy or the gameplay themes that you enjoy or whatever it is, that it's just not going to have as much interest to you at that point, which is totally reasonable. But these games, trading card games, I like to compare to ARPGs. And I used to cover one of the biggest ARPGs in Diablo 4. And I've done a lot of research on, these style of games. Now, for those of you that don't know what ARPGs are, these are action role-playing games essentially that have this same release cycle that card games do in terms of sets. So every few months, 3 months is a good time span, you're going to have a set release in Star Wars Unlimited. And a lot of people, or every 4 months, a lot of people come to experience the new cards and how they affect the meta. They're coming back for the purpose of the new cards. In the intermediate period, so let's say, we had Secrets of Power just release, over a month ago or so. We're starting to see a drop-off of players because the newness of a new set is no longer there. For ARPGs, it's the exact same way. Diablo 4 is a perfect example where you have the base game, which is very good, just like Star Wars Unlimited is. And then every season, and by the way, if you're an ARPG player and you're a Path of Exile player or whatever, just think of that. I'm talking about your game, okay? Every so often, sets or seasons get released with different mechanics or different ways you play the same game that you're used to. And it changes overall strategies, overall builds. But the most important part is a lot of the times you start from scratch. And in card games, it can kind of be similar because maybe it gets power crept or maybe the current iteration of leaders aren't as good. And so you need to revamp by getting new cards. It's very similar in this way. And the excitement for the game jumps up dramatically during these season releases and then slowly starts to drift off after the first 2 to 3 weeks. And rotation is kind of what actually brings people back to the game. So if we didn't have your kind of set releases in general and the rotation, you're not going to have these big spikes of players returning, generally speaking. And I know rotation is a little bit different than just a set release, as set releases are just adding new cards to a pool, at least for as far as we've had in Star Wars Unlimited. Rotation does something very similar in that it shakes up things drastically so people are interested in what the newness of the game is going to feel like. And in some cases, in most cases, the rotation shakes up things so much so that it brings a lot of players back just to try out things that couldn't even be played in the meta. So in terms of a funness perspective, as to whether or not, these three sets in Spark Rebellion, Shadows of the Galaxy, and Twilight of the Republic are your favorite sets or whatever, that's a whole different kind of portion. But in terms of actually bringing people to play and actually bringing eyes to the game and getting people involved to try out new things, it almost always is a success. Now, the aftermath of that, depending on how they roll it out, depending on how good their new sets are, may not retain as many players, and that's kind of the question. The rotation is where, sets, we got a new set release, so that's going to bring back players, since the rotation happens when a new set releases. If the set and the card pool is exciting enough to hold people's interest, reasonably so, then the rotation is going to be kind of all positive. But it does need to be coupled with a very powerful set release. And not powerful in terms of like straight card power, but enjoyment factor. And so I don't think rotation really is going to lead to any sort of end of lifespan. And arguably, this is just talking about the overall kind of feel of the game. We also have so many new avenues for the competitive aspect, because all of these cards that are from set 1 through 3 are now going to be entered into various different Eternal Planetary Qualifiers and different formats, the trilogy format. All of these are still going to be able to be played in those competitive formats. So you're still going to have that aspect. So it's going to bring a whole new side to the competitive aspect that we don't even have yet, because there isn't really Eternal format, because all the cards are legal right now. Well, with the exception of Boba and a few others. But it's going to add a whole new side of the meta for competitive play. And then it's also going to shake up the current meta for the competitive play, to where that whole field is going to get, ideally, a nice breath of fresh air for people who are enjoying the competitive aspect. And again, that is completely outside of kind of people just coming back to try out the new cards and try out the changes to their decks on a set release. But there's another portion to this, which is this is a physical card game. So my comparison to an ARPG has some absolute similarities. And then there are some portions like, well, an ARPG doesn't require you to buy the game again. In some cases, it does. But in most cases, it does not. Well, in a card game, it does. And especially with rotation, because there's a lot of cards that are no longer going to be viable if you're trying to play a specific format. And this is kind of where we dive into another criticism of the game alongside, well, rotation, but also just why people are claiming that the game is, well, going down. For one, with rotation, you're going to have to buy probably a bunch of new cards. But in most cases, people have been buying new cards for the new sets anyways, so you're going to have access to a lot of those options. And one of the main criticisms of the longevity of Star Wars Unlimited has been the secondary market. Sites like TCG Player, for example. I have my link down below that I get to track and see, kind of where the expenditure is coming in from, how much people are interested in. And one thing's for sure, and that is the prices of almost every single set and every card has drastically fallen from its initial release. If you look at like Spark Rebellion, it's one of the few sets that has maintained its initial price point. But if we look at like Shadows of the Galaxy, Legends of the Force, Jump to Lightspeed, and most recently Secrets of Power, well, each booster box is going for like $70, which 60 to 70, which is honestly insanely low from what I'm normally used to. I mean, you even look at Twilight Republic, a set that's pretty weak. You have it listed at, I mean, if you're going to buy this case, like $50 a box, which is insane. And this is something that people reference as a huge red flag within Star Wars Unlimited is the secondary market. The resale value of cards, the collecting portion. So Carbonite boosters have now started to become a little bit of a controversial topic. There is a collection portion for it. I think people really didn't enjoy as much of the prestige cards. but this previous iteration. But in general, there is a collecting portion of it through the prestige cards, and at least in most cases, the people who are actually buying these packs genuinely enjoy collecting these various different options. But also, the resale value of cards, while it does matter to a, let's say, top 10%, the people that are actually trying to either make a long-term investment, which isn't really what the game's usually supposed to be about, but also actually just, stores that are trying to sell certain, product and maybe have the stock for a little while and their prices go down. I mean, generally the stores will sell at MSRP, not compared to, your TCGs, which can give you a little bit of a discount. But when you look through this, yes, the prices are lower. But there hasn't been a single time, at least in my time playing card games, where I've actually gone and sold cards, like online or through TCG, ever. So while the resale value is always exciting to think about, like I have an entire Magic the Gathering collection that I have logged. I know exactly the prices of all my cards, the top 10 most valuable. I watched my Jeweled Lotus when they banned it from Commander go from like $100 down to whatever it is now. But that stuff, while it is kind of psychologically conditioning, doesn't actually come into the real game when you're talking about most casual players. Most casual players do not care about the secondary market. So then it comes down to, okay, what about the people that are actually spending so much money, so much so, that are kind of propping up the product sales and liquidity of various different things in Star Wars Unlimited that's being produced? Well, that's kind of where you might find some issues. I know so many people, I mean, if you have watched a lot of the more finance-related TCG creators out there, have really claimed that this is going to be a big downfall and it should have been dead already. But one thing's certain is that you can't have both, in that you can't have a game like Magic the Gathering and complain about super high prices of cards, and then also complain that the prices of cards are too low at the same time. There's one issue, and obviously it depends on the community as to which one you want to focus on. But one of the bonuses of this is that the cards are actually significantly cheaper. I mean, purchasing a lot of various different decks that are using not the, prestige editions or showcases, but using just the standard rares and such are actually relatively cheap. I mean, if you start looking at actual cards here, these are all the promo versions. And I mean, $50, $60, $70, I can tell you that through Magic, there are multiple cards in their standard versions worth far more than that in a lot of cases for some of their very standard sets. But I'm still going, and I'm not even seeing the base version of a card, over, the $30 mark, the $30, $40 mark. So while yes, the prices of cards for product sales and the overall longevity of the game may be lower, it also allows people to go in and potentially pick up cards after sets come in, after rotations come in, or if they're just looking to change up their deck, which is always a plus. Always, always a plus. So I don't think this has actually a whole lot to do with the interest of the game, which I think is the main driving factor of whether the game is going to be dead or not. It's, are people showing up to tournaments? Are people actually looking for the game? Are people actually engaging with the game? Because you could talk all these numbers about the prices of cards, and this will lead to, some sort of product issue, or this is going to lead to stores, having some issue with this or the other thing. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to, are people interested in the game? And if they are, they're going to find a way to make it work. And that's where we dive into kind of the portion where I am most familiar with, outside, of course, listening to a lot of the community complaints and their overall feelings. I directly am able to get immediate feedback on the amount of views, the amount of people coming in, the amount of people searching for Star Wars Unlimited, the amount of people actually engaging and wanting to either watch, play, or listen about the game. And this is just one example of it. I'm also going to refer to my own YouTube analytics as someone who I haven't compared the numbers in a while, but I think, between all the different Star Wars Unlimited creators in terms of a monthly basis on view count, I'm definitely one of the higher numbers. So it is at least a bigger sample size of the community members in Star Wars Unlimited than that I'm able to interpret and compare across multiple sets. If you look at the interest over time, I have been covering the game since, March, I believe. I think it was a week or two after the set released, Spark of Rebellion, that I started making videos. So somewhere around here. And I've watched through the absolute highs of like Shadows of the Galaxy or Legends of the Force more recently. And then we're over here, which was the release of Secrets of Power, right? This uptrend was Secrets of Power. And one thing certain is that the competitive aspect of Star Wars Unlimited has gotten more and more interest ever since we started to see the Galactic Championship and the kind of official point system and the way they've been monitoring and kind of, I guess, assisting players with being able to engage with the competitive systems has brought a lot of interest to the game. And you can see this, especially with the Galactic Championship, which took place back in July. We had a huge spike, not only because of the release of Legends of the Force, but also the biggest tournament that we have ever seen. Now, Secrets of Power released here, and you could see kind of this, cyclical up and down search trend. I expect this to continue to kind of follow a downward trend until the next set released. As you can see, for the most part, this is a set release, this is a set release, this is a set release, and then, we had a little bit of a blip here between this period where the set release didn't actually bring anyone back because Shadows of the Galaxy was such a mediocre set at the time, and Twilight of the Republic was also, at the current moment, the most mediocre set of them all. So the back-to-back poor sets had definitely dwindled the interest and couldn't bring people back. So when we're looking at this, Secrets of Power has been received reasonably well. It's not a banger like Legends of the Force was. Legends of the Force is an absolute banger in terms of people's interest. Secrets of Power is not the worst like Twilight Republic or anything, but it's definitely sort of like a mid to low tier set in terms of what people's interest in, whether the thematic, the mechanics, or just the overall power of the set. It's definitely a mid to low tier set. So if we have another set in set 7 to where it's also on the same level as Twilight Republic or your Shadows of the Galaxy. Again, this is misleading because at the time, people were like, the game is dying. Like I said, the same stuff that we're hearing about lately because of Shadows of the Galaxy's horrible launch for many reasons. Then we could see a downtrend similar to the Twilight Republic, which doesn't mean that the game's dying, just means that we had some pretty poor set releases. I doubt that this would be the case. Like I said, rotation in of itself brings a lot of players back. You do need a set that couples very well with it to maintain that interest. But in terms of the initial interest of it, people are going to come back. It's almost a certainty. Every single time I have been tracking my analytics, there has been a spike of interest, a spike of views, and a spike of overall watchers across the channel from people coming from various different countries, various different languages, various different places, like where they're finding it, from Google, from Reddit, from Discord, whatever it is. I could see all of those numbers have an upturn, even in the darkest days like Twilight of the Republic. Even then, there was a big spike in interest. But what's most key is the longevity of the game past rotation, right? Where are we going to end up afterwards? Because we know, as we mentioned earlier, with the set releases, rotation, how it compares to basically every other game that has this similar cycle, that people are going to come back for the release of this set. The question is, what are we introducing in this new set that is actually going to want people to stick around, or people are going to want to stick around? I think this is actually one of the more intriguing sets because it's really going to flip everything on its head with the introduction of dual aspect cards, bases, and being able to really mix and match cards that we never had been able to do before. Of course, the power level of some cards already looks incredible. We have the new sort of like treasure tokens, but the credit tokens mechanic that has been introduced already in kind of the spoiler. And we're going to be getting, as of recording this video, well, it hasn't popped out yet, but when I'm recording it tomorrow, we should be seeing a first look at the new set 7. And so that looks already, with the initial spoiler, without even talking about the first look, well, looks like it's going to be a really, really like mix up everything type of set, which generally is a good thing when you're having a mass rotation of cards that allows you to be very creative with everything that you've got going on. So at the end of the day, in terms of my own viewership, what my community is seeing, and what overall the trends based on a lot of other games that I participated in, I don't see the game going anywhere for any time in the future. The game seems perfectly reasonably healthy. As a lot of the competitive tournaments have had some major interest. I mean, even the Galactic Championship, which I know is the biggest tournament of the year, but we had, I don't even know how many players were there, but it felt like maybe 2,000 to 3,000. I mean, there were so many, even in day one entrance. I mean, we had a massive amount. It was difficult to get to day 2 just because of the sheer amount of, people there and having to kind of maintain a 6-2 record, right? They really had to trim the amount of people down to the top 64 and eventually top 8. And there was no shortage of interest. I mean, people were complaining about the lines throughout the door because, well, the poorly managed prize wall. But that's because there were so many people not only interested in the game, but also interested in the collectible aspect of things and in just engaging overall. So the game is relatively new. And there's a lot to learn, right? There's a lot to refining to do, whether it's the competitive aspect, the meta, the balancing of cards, releases of sets, how they're going to want to develop cards, how they're going to want to run competitive events, etc., etc., etc. But they're going to have the time to do so, at least for the foreseeable couple of years. I'm not going to predict that this is going to last for 5-10 years or anything like that, become the next 30-year anniversary, 35-year anniversary, like Magic the Gathering type of a game. But at least in terms of the timeline that they currently have, set 8, set 7, set 8, set 9, that they are already planning out for the next year. I mean, I think they mentioned that they developed 6 sets in advance. I don't think anything different is going to be happening there. So for those of you that think the game is dying, honestly, this is not even the lowest point, right? I know, because I could watch all my analytics drop to the lowest it had ever been during some months of the Twilight of the Republic era. And even at the very tail end of Shadows of the Galaxy, where people's interest really waned at the very end there. I can see all that. And I've been tracking it because that's literally what I do. It's also one of the benefits I get because of all the support that I get from the patrons and from you all viewing the videos. So realistically, I think it's a very loud minority and people largely just complaining about the rotation, which is rightfully so. Like, if you don't like the rotation, that is perfectly reasonable to complain about. But the game dying is not a conclusion that I would draw from that complaint. So just something to keep in mind. For those of you that are, still excited about the game, still want to see videos, still want to play the game, etc., just drown out the noise, especially if your play group are upset, etc. I'm generally very positive when it comes to making the videos. You'll know that I'm not very positive on a game generally if I am not making as many videos as I used to, right? With the exception of, taking a break here and there in terms of holidays or whatever, but because I won't make videos if I'm not enjoying a game as much as I used to, or if I'm not having fun, etc. Right? So if you're having fun, just keep having fun. There's no reason to sit back and try to justify the game to people who aren't happy. If they're not happy, they should take a break, come back for the next set. Maybe that'll change their opinion. That's kind of the beauty of these set releases and overall seasons, just like ARPGs. Like I mentioned earlier, they have that effect where you could take a break, come back. There's going to be a new meta. It's not like you're super far behind. Not really a whole lot of changes besides the new cards, which everyone's getting used to. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for supporting the channel. I still can't believe it's almost been 2 years. It always is crazy to me. But I'll see you all for the next one.